The Rhineland village square carried the scent of destruction in April 1945. Ash mingled with pulverized plaster, while smoke drifted upward from buildings stripped of their roofs, rising like unanswered prayers into the gray sky. Lieutenant James Avery moved through the debris, his Lee Enfield rifle hanging at his side. His boots ground across shattered glass that had once formed a baker's storefront window, a schoolroom pane, fragments of ordinary Sunday mornings, now reduced to shards. Then his eyes found her, a woman bound to a wooden post at the square's center. Her nurse's uniform hung torn at the shoulder, streaked with mud and blood. Above her head, someone had nailed a crudely painted sign bearing a single word in brutal block letters, Verräterin, traitor. The crowd surrounding her numbered perhaps 20 or 30 villagers. Old men wore threadbare coats. Women stood with hollowed cheeks. A child kicked at loose gravel. Someone spat, the sound landing wetly on stone. Avery felt the moment's weight before fully comprehending it. The rifle in his hands, the uniform marking him simultaneously as liberator and enemy, the woman's bowed head still drawing breath. 60 seconds remained before someone in that crowd would decide that waiting carried more guilt than action. His section had been assigned to secure the eastern checkpoint. Clear roads, mark mines, let the village resolve its own affairs. But a woman's cry had pulled him here, sharp and sudden, cut short by a hand or fist. Avery signaled to Corporal Dorse, hold position, safeties on, no shots. He stepped into the square alone. The crowd turned. An elderly man in a stained Homburg moved forward, gesturing at the woman as though she were evidence itself. She helped your men, he declared. She gave them water while our boy's blood. She is a traitor. Avery's heartbeat drummed in his throat. He had stood inside burning buildings and felt calmer. This was different. A village attempting to cauterize its shame by burning the wound. He looked at the woman. Her wrists showed raw where rope bit into flesh. Her face displayed bruises in shades of violet and gray. But when her eyes lifted to meet his, they held no pleading, only exhaustion, resignation. What happened next would test the thinnest line in war, the boundary between justice and murder, between orders and conscience, between the man he had been taught to become and the man war demanded he be. Avery did not raise his rifle. Instead, he planted it butt first against the cobblestones like a stake claiming ground. Halt, he commanded in German, the word clipped and clean as a parade, ground order. The crowd hesitated, not from fear, but from the sudden friction of interrupted momentum. They had been a river, now they pooled like water, uncertain which direction to flow. The old man in the Homburg recovered first, his voice climbing with indignation. This does not concern you, Herr Offizier. This is German justice. Our village, our traitor, your village is now British jurisdiction. Avery replied, his German stiff but deliberate, each word placed with precision. And I see no justice here, only a rope and a crowd. A younger man pushed forward, mid-30s, gaunt-faced, one sleeve pinned empty at the shoulder. A veteran, the kind who carried war in his bones and rage in his marrow. She gave water to your men. He spat, jabbing his remaining hand toward the woman. While my brother died 3 streets away, choking on his own blood, she was washing British wounds, bandaging British hands. She chose them over us. Avery let silence settle for 3 breaths. Then what is her name? The question landed like a wrench thrown into gears. What? The one armed man blinked. Her name, Avery repeated, slower now. If you are executing her for treason, you must know her name, her rank, her unit, the specific charges. Show me the court-martial documentation. Show me the Feldgendarmerie order. Show me anything that says this is law and not a lynching. The old man sputtered. We do not need papers to know betrayal. Then you do not have justice. Avery said, his voice hardening. You have revenge, and revenge is not yours to take. Not anymore. A woman's voice rose from the back, raw and ragged with grief. She let them live. The soldiers who bombed our children, who burned our homes. She saved them. Avery turned toward the voice. finding what might have been a mother or widow, someone hollowed by loss and searching for a shape to fill the void. Did she pull the triggers? He asked, softer but no less firm. Did she load the bombers? Did she give the orders? She gave them mercy. The woman choked out. While we had none. Then she was a nurse, Avery said simply, doing what nurses do. Verräterin, someone shouted from the crowd's edge. Traitor! The word flew like a thrown stone. Others picked it up. A chant half-hearted but gaining heat, the mob trying to remember why it had gathered, trying to reconvince itself. Avery saw him then, the ringleader, not the old man, not the veteran. A younger man in his late 20s, standing 3 rows back. Despite the surrounding ruin, he wore an expensive coat. Clean-shaven, eyes cold and calculating. The kind of man who never threw stones himself, but knew exactly when to point at the target. This one hadn't lost family. He had lost standing, lost something the war had taken from him, and he needed someone to pay. Herr Offizier, the ringleader said smoothly, stepping forward with a politician's ease. We understand your position, but you must understand ours. This woman defied orders. She stayed behind when we were told to evacuate. She aided enemy combatants. These are facts. The sentence has been decided. Decided by whom? Avery asked, meeting the man's gaze directly. By the people she betrayed. Then the people have no authority. Avery's words dropped like a gavel. I do. The ringleader smiled, thin, cold. You are one man, her lieutenant. With a section of tired soldiers in a village that does not want you here. You cannot police every corner, every street, every moment. We reclaim what is ours. It was a threat wrapped in courtesy, a calculation presented as fact. Avery felt Corporal Doors shift at the square's edge, saw the subtle repositioning of his section, trained, disciplined, reading the temperature drop. He took one step forward, then another, close enough now that the ringleader could see the mud on his uniform, the days without sleep in his eyes, the war that had made him older than his 26 years. You are correct? Avery said quietly in English, letting the foreignness assert itself, then switching back to German. I am one man, but I am the man with the rifle and the authority of His Majesty's armed forces. And if you touch her again, you will learn exactly how much one man can do when he decides the law matters more than the mob. The ringleader's smile faltered. Avery pivoted, addressing the crowd now, his voice carrying. This woman is under British protective custody. Any attempt to harm her will be considered an act of aggression against Allied forces and will be met accordingly. If you have charges, you will submit them in writing to military government. If you have evidence, you will present it to a proper tribunal. Until then, she is not yours. The old man tried once more, voice shaking. But she? I know what she did. Avery interrupted, though he didn't. Not yet. And I know what you want to do. But wanting is not the same as being right. And being angry is not the same as being just. He turned to the post. The woman's eyes tracked him, exhausted and wary, waiting for the next cruelty. Verräterin, he said, voice low enough that only she heard. I am Lieutenant Avery, British Army. I'm going to cut the rope now. Do you understand? She nodded barely. A movement small as a prayer. Avery drew his knife. The blade caught the gray light, reflecting nothing back. The rope was cheap hemp, frayed at the edges, tied with the kind of knot learned for tethering animals. It parted under pressure, falling away like a spell breaking. The woman collapsed forward. Avery caught her, his arm around her shoulders, steadying her weight against his chest. She weighed almost nothing. War had rationed even the substance of bodies. Ease ist vorbei, he murmured. It's over. Her breath shuddered against his uniform. Behind him, the crowd did not cheer or riot. It simply dispersed, slowly, reluctantly, like smoke losing its shape. The ringleader melted back into the rubble. The old man spat once more and turned away. The mother with the ragged voice covered her face and wept. Corporal Doors appeared at Avery's elbow. Sir, ambulance is 2 minutes out. Good. Avery shifted his grip. lifting the woman fully, cradling her like something breakable, which she was, which they all were. As he carried her across the square toward his waiting section, he felt it. The cost of choosing. His hands remained steady. His orders had been clear. But something inside him had shifted, a weight redistributed. The war had never been impersonal, but it had been distant, a thing of maps and objectives, movements and missions. Now it was this, a woman's pulse against his forearm, a village's hatred in his wake, a choice made not because it was ordered, but because it was necessary. He had crossed a line he could not uncross. When the ambulance arrived, olive drab, Red Cross painted bright on the canvas, he handed her over to the medics with the careful precision of someone passing a lit candle in the dark. Take her to the aid station, he told the driver. Protective custody. No visitors without my clearance. The driver nodded, professional. Understood, sir. Avery stepped back, watching the ambulance pull away, tires grinding gravel and ash. The square stood empty now except for his section. The post remained alone, the sign still nailed above Verräterin. Doors cleared his throat. Orders, sir? Avery looked at the post for a long moment. Then he reached up and wrenched the sign free with both hands. The wood splintered, the nails shrieked. He dropped it to the ground, letting it lie face down in the mud. We move out in 10, he said. Check the perimeter. Mark this square secure. And the woman, sir? Avery turned, looking at his corporal. Dors had been with him since Normandy, had seen every kind of hell, never asked a question that wasn't necessary. The woman, Avery said slowly, is no longer their problem. She's ours. The field hospital tent carried the smell of canvas, iodine, and the particular staleness of air cycled through too many lungs. Avery sat on an overturned crate beside the cot, watching the woman sleep. She had been unconscious for 4 hours. The medic, a Scotsman named MacLeod with watchmaker's hands, had cataloged her injuries with clinical precision to cracked ribs, severe dehydration, contusions mapping her back like failed geography lessons, rope burns encircling both wrists. She'll wake, MacLeod had said. Body's just demanding the rest it's owed. As dusk bled through the tent canvas, she stirred. Her eyes opened slowly, focusing on nothing, then everything. She saw the IV line first, then the British field dressing on her shoulder, then Avery. She didn't flinch, just watched him with the careful neutrality of someone who had learned not to expect kindness. Wasser, she whispered. Water. Avery reached for the canteen MacLeod had left, holding it to her lips. She drank like someone who had forgotten the shape of mercy, small sips, hesitant, as if the water might be rescinded. Thank you, she said in German, then switched to heavily accented English. You are the officer from the square, Lieutenant Avery. He set the canteen down. You're safe here, under British protection. She almost laughed. The sound caught in her throat became a cough. Safe. Yes, I have heard this word before. What's your name? A pause, as if even this simple fact might be dangerous. Liesa, she said finally. Liesa Hartmann. I was a nurse. Kriegslaser at Sector West, Rhineland Front. She paused. I am not a nurse anymore, only a traitor. Tell me what happened, Avery said. From the beginning. She told it slowly in fragments, like someone assembling a broken mirror. The hospital had been a repurposed schoolhouse. 20 beds that became 40, then 60, then bodies on the floor because there was nowhere else to put them. 3 doctors, 8 nurses, dwindling supplies that turned medicine into mathematics. Who gets the morphine? Who gets the bandage? Who gets to die slower? February was when it started to collapse. The front didn't retreat. It dissolved. One day they had supply lines. The next they had rumors. German units mixed with stragglers, deserters, boys in uniforms 3 sizes too large who looked at the nurses like they were ghosts. The order came in March. Liesa said, her voice flat with exhaustion. Fall back. Leave the ones who cannot walk. Avery knew this order, had read the intelligence reports. The Wehrmacht in full collapse. Discipline fraying, Officers executing their own men for refusing suicidal stands. We were supposed to leave them. Her eyes found his. 32 men, some German, some not. We had British prisoners, Americans, even a Russian, all bleeding the same, all needing hands that knew how to close wounds instead of opening them. She stayed. 3 nurses stayed. The doctors fled. With boiled bandages in rainwater, she said. Used snaps when the ether ran out. I held a boy's hand while he died. German boy, maybe 17. He called me muddy mother. I was 23. The detail landed like shrapnel. She described amputations by candlelight, a British sergeant who sang hymns through his fever, a Luftwaffe pilot who sketched birds on the walls with charcoal from the stove. Then your men came, she said. A patrol. Lost, looking for their unit. One was wounded. Shrapnel in his shoulder, bleeding badly. Red hair, freckles like a child. Avery listened without interrupting, letting her build the testimony brick by brick. His name was Thomas, Tommy. He made jokes even while I dug metal from his flesh. Asked if I had a sister. She smiled faintly at the memory. I told him I had 3 brothers. All dead now, he cried. Not from pain, from that. The British patrol stayed 2 days. Long enough for Tommy's fever to break, long enough for the other wounded to see that the enemy wore the same exhaustion they did. One of the soldiers, an older corporal, shared his chocolate. Real chocolate. She hadn't tasted it in 2 years. He gave it to the German boys too, saying, "War's done, lads. Might as well be human before we go back to killing each other." When the patrol left, they offered to take her. She refused. Someone had to stay, but someone saw a villager, a gendarmerie officer, or someone claiming to be one in a war where authority was whatever uniform you could scavenge. He called it treason, Liesa said, her voice hardening, aiding the enemy, consorting with occupiers, betraying the Reich. The real betrayal, Avery thought, was expecting her to choose nation over mercy. They came at night. She continued. Dragged me from the hospital. The wounded, those who could still move. They tried to stop it. A boy with one leg stood between me and the soldiers. They beat him unconscious. She was tied to the post at dawn, the sign painted while she watched. They told her she would hang at sunset as an example, so others would know the price of kindness. Her voice fractured on the last word. She turned her face away toward the tent wall, where shadows flickered like the ghosts of flames. Avery sat in the silence that followed. Outside, the camp settled into evening routine, mess tins clanging, voices trading cigarettes and rumors, the distant cough of an engine. He thought about the war they taught at Sandhurst, the clean one with clear enemies and clearer orders. Then he thought about the war he had lived, the one where a German nurse saving a British soldier became a capital crime. In these last months, he said quietly, speaking as much to himself as to her, we have seen things fall apart, not just armies, people. The rules we thought were iron turned out to be smoke. He had seen reprisal killings, civilians shot for hiding deserters, soldiers hanged for refusing to defend ruins. A world where mercy became heresy and survival demanded you choose between your humanity and your life. Liesa looked back at him. Her eyes were dry now. Exhaustion had burned through the tears. What happens to me now? You stay here, Avery said, under protection. I'll make sure the record states you acted as a medical professional under impossible conditions. No charges, no trial, no more signs. And when you leave, it was the question he had been avoiding. Then you will have papers that say the British Army vouches for your character. It may not be enough, but it is what I can give. She nodded slowly, accepting this fragile promise. Thank you, Lieutenant Avery, for the water, for the words, for standing in the square when you did not have to. I did have to, he replied. I just didn't know it until I saw the rope. British Second Army Headquarters, Temporary Command Post, Rhineland Sector, April 17, 1945. Major Clifton sat behind a field desk that had seen better wars. Maps curled at the edges, a cigarette burned forgotten in a tin ashtray. He read Avery's incident report for the 3rd time, lips pressed thin, Lieutenant. His voice was sand and gravel. Walk me through your decision tree. Avery stood at attention, cap under his arm, uniform still carrying yesterday's mud. Sir, I encountered a civilian detained without proper authority. I assessed the situation as extrajudicial punishment and intervened per Article 27 of the Geneva Convention regarding. I know the bloody convention, Avery. Clifton dropped the report. What I don't know is why you thought it was your job to play magistrate in a German village square. With respect, sir, I was preventing a murder. You were exceeding your authority. Clifton leaned back, chair groaning. Your orders were checkpoint security, not social work, not playing savior to every sob story in a nurse's uniform. The words landed like a slap. Avery kept his face neutral, parade ground blank. She wasn't a sob story. Sir, she was a prisoner about to be executed by a mob, a German prisoner in a German village dealing with German justice, or injustice if you prefer, not your problem. Silence filled the space between them, heavy as smoke. Clifton sighed, suddenly older. Listen, James, I understand the impulse. God knows I do. But we're not here to referee every score they want to settle. We're here to secure ground, establish order, and move east. The minute you start caring about every rope and post, you stop being a soldier and start being what, sir? A liability. The words sat between them like unexploded ordnance. Permission to speak freely, sir. Clifton waved a hand. You're already waist deep. Might as well wade in. If we ignore civilians being murdered in our jurisdiction, we're not establishing order. We're sanctioning chaos. We become complicit in the very barbarism we're supposed to be ending. Careful, Lieutenant. That sounds dangerously close to philosophy. We don't pay you to philosophize. We pay you to follow orders. My orders. Avery said quietly, include upholding the laws of war, even when it's inconvenient. Clifton studied him for a long moment, then reached for his cigarette, found it cold, lit another. You know what your problem is, Avery. You still think war has rules. From Lieutenant James Avery's personal diary. April 17th, 1945. Mother would say I'm making things complicated again. She always said I thought too much. That thinking was a luxury soldiers couldn't afford. Maybe she was right. But I keep seeing the rope, the sign, the woman's face when I cut her free, the way she folded like something held together by will alone. Clifton asked me why I intervened. I gave him the official answer. Geneva Convention, proper authority, legal duty. But the truth is simpler and more damning. I intervened because if I hadn't, I would have become the kind of man who walks past the lynching. I would have become the kind of man who lets convenience murder conscience. Is that philosophy? Or is that just being human? Avery wrote at a borrowed desk in the officer's mess, cup of tea gone cold beside him. Around him, the machinery of war continued. Radio chatter, boots on duckboards, someone arguing about fuel allocations. He thought about his brother. David had died at Dunkirk, shot while covering a retreat that saved 30 men. Posthumous commendation. A medal sent to their mother in a box she never opened. David believed in duty above all, duty above doubt, above fear, above the small voice that asks why. Avery enlisted 3 months later, tried to fill the space his brother left, tried to be the kind of soldier David was. Certain, unwavering, faithful to orders as if orders were gospel. But war teaches things training doesn't. It teaches that orders come from men and men are fallible. It teaches that duty can be a suicide pact if you're not careful. It teaches that sometimes the most important thing you can do is say no. David never learned that. David died believing. Avery was still trying to figure out what he believed in. The chaos of post, liberation Europe sprawled beyond the command post like a fever dream. Villages policed themselves with rope and rumor. Civilians took revenge on collaborators, real and imagined. Women were shaved, beaten, paraded through streets. Men were shot in ditches for crimes as vague as working with them or as specific as being seen. The Allies tried to impose order, but order was a fiction in a world where the rules had dissolved months ago. Military government issued proclamations, villagers ignored them. Soldiers patrolled streets, revenge happened at night. Avery had seen it in recent weeks alone. A French woman stoned for sleeping with a German, a Dutch mayor hanged for requisitioning food, a Belgian priest beaten for sheltering deserters. Justice as catharsis, punishment as purge, and soldiers caught between. Do you intervene? Do you let it happen? Do you draw the line? Or do you acknowledge the line is already ashes? Mercy is not mission, Clifton had said. But what was the mission if not to prevent the world from devouring itself? British Second Army HQ. Later that evening, Clifton found Avery smoking outside the mess tent, watching the sky darken over the shattered landscape. You're not in trouble? The major said without preamble. Officially, the report will note your actions as within acceptable discretion given fluid circumstances. You'll get no commendation, but no reprimand either. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me. I'm still not sure you were right. Clifton lit his own cigarette, exhaled slowly. But I'm not sure you were wrong either. And that bothers me more than I care to admit. They stood in silence. Two men watching the same war from different angles. Can I ask you something, sir? If I say no, will it stop you? Did you ever wonder if we're the traitors? Clifton turned, eyebrow raised. Explain. We swore oaths to fight barbarism, to defend civilization, to uphold certain principles. But how often do we ignore those principles because enforcing them is inconvenient? How often do we look away because looking costs too much? Every day. Clifton said quietly. Every single day. Little, sir? Really? The major considered this. Ashes fell from his cigarette like snow. I think, he said, finally, we're loyal to the idea that someday, when this is over, we might still recognize ourselves in the mirror. That's the best I can offer you, Lieutenant. The rest is just surviving until we get there. He ground out his cigarette, turned to leave, then paused. The nurse, Liesa. What happens to her? She stays under British protection. I've arranged transfer to a DP camp with proper documentation. After that, Avery shrugged. After that, she's a German woman in a Germany that may not forgive her for being kind. So you saved her for what? 6 months. A year. I saved her for one day, Avery said. The day she was about to die. That's all any of us can do. Clifton nodded slowly. Maybe that's enough. Maybe. Avery echoed. Or maybe it's just what we tell ourselves so we can sleep. The major walked away, boots crunching gravel. Avery finished his cigarette, watching embers fall like small surrenders. Above, stars emerged through the smoke. Indifferent, eternal, watching a world that ate itself and called it justice. Tomorrow he would return to duty, would clear roads, secure checkpoints, follow orders. But tonight he was a man who had cut a rope and wondered if compassion was disobedience, or if obedience without compassion was the greater betrayal. April 23rd, 1945, British DP Processing Center, Rhineland. The paperwork took longer than the rescue. Liesa Hartmann sat across from a clerk who typed with 2 fingers, hunting and pecking through her testimony. Name, age, occupation, circumstances of detention, reason for British intervention. The clerk asked if she had family. She said no. He asked if she had a destination. She said no. He stamped 3 forms, filed them in a folder that joined hundreds of others in a canvas bag destined for an archive that might never be opened. Next, the clerk called. Liesa stood, holding a paper that said she was a displaced person under Allied protection. It did not say she was innocent. It did not say she was right. It said only that she existed, and that for now, that was enough. Avery watched from the doorway. She saw him, nodded once. Acknowledgement, not gratitude. Gratitude implied debt. What had passed between them in that square was something else, something without a name in any language he knew. Where will you go? He asked. West, she said. Away from the ruins. Perhaps to family I hope still breathe. Perhaps to no one. It does not matter. I am alive. which means I must continue being alive. If you need anything, you have given what you could, Lieutenant." Her voice was gentle, final. "The rest is mine to carry." She walked away, folding herself into the river of refugees that flowed west like water finding its level. Avery watched until she disappeared into the crowd, another story the war would swallow and never fully digest. He wondered if he would remember her face in 10 years, 20, or if she would become just another moment in a war built of moments, important when it happened, inevitable when it was over. Avery returned to the square before his unit moved out. Dawn light cut through the ruins, painting everything the color of old bone. The post still stood, though someone had tried to burn it. The wood was charred at the base, black tongue, marks licking upward, but it had not fallen. It remained, defiant or indifferent. It was hard to say. The sign lay face down in the mud where he had dropped it. Rain had softened the letters. Verräterin, the paint bleeding into the grain, the accusation dissolving into abstraction. Avery knelt, turned it over, stared at the word that had meant death, now just wood and weather. He thought about burning it, about smashing it, about carrying it back to headquarters as evidence of something, though evidence of what he couldn't name. Instead, he left it there, half buried, fading. Some things should be remembered. Some things should be forgotten. Most things exist in the terrible space between. In the final months of World War II, Europe dissolved into a chaos that history textbooks struggle to capture. The liberation was not clean. It was not simple. It was a reckoning that came in waves, each one exposing new layers of guilt, new categories of victim, new impossible questions about who deserved mercy and who deserved judgment. Between April and August 1945, Allied forces documented over 10,000 cases of reprisal killings across occupied Germany, civilians accused of collaboration, deserters executed by their own retreating armies, women punished for loving the wrong uniform. The numbers are estimates. Most deaths left no paperwork, no witness, no grave. Military hospitals and field stations became sanctuaries for those caught between vengeance and law. Nurses like Liesa Hartmann, German, French, Dutch, Italian, who treated wounded regardless of flag, found themselves branded traitors by communities desperate to assign blame for their suffering. The International Red Cross recorded 847 such cases in Germany alone. Most received no recognition. Some received punishment. A handful, like Liesa, received the one thing rarer than mercy in those days, a second chance. Lieutenant James Avery was one of thousands of Allied officers tasked with policing the collapse. They cleared mines, secured roads, and made impossible decisions about when to intervene in the rage of villages that had earned their rage honestly. Some looked away. Some drew lines. All of them carried the weight of choices made in moments too fast for certainty, too important for doubt. The post-war trials, Nuremberg and beyond, would establish frameworks for justice. But before the frameworks, there were only men and women standing in ruined squares, asking themselves what humanity meant when the world had forgotten. Avery wrote to his mother from a requisitioned house in what used to be a German officer's quarters. The furniture was gone, looted or burned. Only the wallpaper remained, floral patterns faded by sun and smoke. "Dear Mother, I cannot tell you much about where I am or what I do. The censors would cut my words to confetti. But I can tell you this, the war you read about in newspapers is not the war we live. The war you read about has clear sides. The one we live has only shades of gray, each one darker than the last. I think of David often. Wonder what he would have done in my place. He always knew the right answer, or seemed to. He had a certainty I envy and distrust in equal measure. I am learning that certainty is a luxury. Perhaps the only luxury war truly denies us. I will come home different than I left. I do not know if this is forgiveness I ask or warning I give. Perhaps both. Your son, James Liesa Hartmann, survived the war, worked in a British hospital for displaced persons. Immigrated to Canada in 1947, married a teacher, raised two children who never quite understood why their mother flinched at Ray's voices, why she kept bandages in every room, why she volunteered at hospitals until arthritis took her hands. She died in 1983. Her obituary mentioned nothing of the post, the rope, or the sign. It mentioned only that she was kind. James Avery remained in the Army until 1948, rose to captain, declined to stay for a career, opened a bookshop in Kent where he sold secondhand histories and drank tea with customers who wanted to talk about anything except the war. He never wrote about the square, never spoke of it except once to a nephew studying philosophy who asked what he had learned in the war. That loyalty, Avery said slowly, is not to flags or orders or even countries. Loyalty, in the end, is to the human being standing in front of you. Everything else is just noise we make to justify looking away. The nephew didn't understand, not then. But he would. The sign said traitor. But the greater betrayal would have been to walk away in a world fracturing into sides, into us and them, into who deserves mercy and who deserves rope. The most radical act is the simplest: to see a person and refuse to unsee them, to stand in the space between cruelty and crowd and say, not this, not today, not while I'm breathing. Avery and Liesa were not heroes. They were people who, for one moment, chose differently, chose life when death was easier, chose mercy when vengeance was expected, chose humanity when the world demanded they choose sides. The war taught a million lessons: tactics and strategy, logistics and loss. But the only lesson that matters is this: when the rope is ready and the crowd is certain and the sign proclaims guilt without trial, someone must cut the rope. Someone must question the sign. Someone must remember that the person tied to the post is still a person. That is not heroism. That is not philosophy. That is loyalty to the only thing worth being loyal to, the idea that being human means more than surviving. It means choosing in the moments that matter, to see each other clearly, and then to act as if that seeing demands something of us. Because it does.